Great to see everyone. It's a beautiful day here at Hokioji. It is very fall, and yeah, it's great to be with everybody this morning. This is Bo. I'm Alex. We're newish residents here at Hokioji, and excited to be here. This morning we have Reverend Kikan, Michael Howard, and he's going to say a little bit this morning about happiness in Buddhism. And Kikan started practicing at Clouds and Water in the late 90s and ordained in 2018. He led the youth practice program for 5 years, and his interests include Buddhist psychology, emotion dynamics, and data visualization. He produces the great website Katagiritranscripts.net. It's a great resource where he carefully transcribes the Dharma talks of Katagiri Roshi as an aid to Buddhist study. And he is also an independent app developer. And I had the pleasure of practicing closely with Kikan a couple weeks back at Compassionate Ocean's practice period. And he has a strong sense of inquisitiveness, and he asks hard questions, and I really appreciated that, and I appreciated practicing with him during that time. So Kikan, take it away.
Thanks, Alex. I appreciate that. Guess what we're going to do today? We're going to ask some more hard questions. I hope everybody's okay with that. I know in a talk branded as being about happiness, you might not be expecting that or looking for that, but I think that's probably going to come up. So let me put my title slide in here. Okay, can you all see me and can you all hear me? All right, I am going to start my timer for thank you. Good to see you too, Bo. Didn't miss you at the Compassionate Ocean thing. We're going to be picking up. Actually, I'm going to be continuing some questions of mine that came up in the Compassionate Ocean retreat. So Alex was there. Bo, you missed that, but I don't know. You might kind of get some of the very abbreviated highlights of that retreat in this session. Very abbreviated because we don't have a lot of time. And of course, I'm talking, so now my cat wants attention. Just a second. So hopefully everybody can see me and hear me. The name of my talk is What Does Happiness Mean in Buddhism? It may not be a great title because I think a lot of people might think, oh, well, we know what that means. We know what happiness means. We know what joy means. But let's look a little bit more closely, perhaps. What I want to do in this talk is, let's see here. Am I currently spotlighted? You're good? Okay, I'm gonna pin myself so I can actually see what I'm doing. And please, if you have any questions that you'd like immediately addressed during this, speak up. The way I have to do this on my screen here, I can kind of see you, but not like really well. So you might actually have to speak up if you have a question. And I will try to leave some space for questions at the end. So at this Compassionate Ocean retreat, which was great, I was there for the majority of it. We talked about mainly this first book, Breathe, You Are Alive, by Thich Nhat Hanh, Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh, who passed not that long ago. And this is a very popular book. I think it says somewhere, maybe you can't see it, but this is the special 20th anniversary edition. So this book has been around for quite a while. And the focus of this book is the Anapanasati Sutta, the Sutra on the Full Awareness of Breathing. Interestingly, Wallace's translation of that is pretty much the same, Sutra on the Full Awareness of Breathing. This is a foundational sutra, particularly in the Theravadan tradition, I think. In Mahayana Buddhism, it often we don't always get to this. It's not quite as foundational. However, it is kind of becoming more popular to look at, apparently. And as we were looking at that, some questions were coming up because there's this other book which has been highlighted at Hokyoji called Basic Teachings of the Buddha. This is a much more recent work by scholar Glenn Wallace, where he's providing kind of a different translation and interpretation of, well, actually a selection of the Buddha's teachings of the sutras from the Pali Canon. And also this same sutta, I'm going to go back and forth probably between saying sutta and sutra. Sutta is the Pali and sutra is the Sanskrit. I just kind of mix those up sometimes. And the Anapanasati Sutta is, I think, the 15th out of 16 selections in Basic Teachings of the Buddha. So Glenn Wallace has his different translation. And what was coming up for me as my primary question in this retreat with Compassionate Ocean is a question that's come up for me a lot in my kind of Buddhist career, which is we talk a lot about happiness and joy in Buddhism. And what do we mean by that? And why it was particularly coming up for me, and I admit I have a certain amount of energy around this, so you might get a little bit of a rant here, is that in this particular book, Thich Nhat Hanh is translating the sutra and says a couple of times something to the effect of make your mind happy as a practice instruction. We'll get a little bit more into the detail. And my question is, what does that mean? Is that a reliable translation of the actual Sanskrit or Pali word? And how do you do that? Why is this important? Well, a lot of reasons. Let me give you a quick example. I used to work with kids. Excuse me one moment. Hang on. Sorry, cat management. And just a quick example with kids. A couple of times I worked with kids who decide something along the lines of, okay, I'm just going to be happy from here on. And that's something that they might pick up as being the thrust of Buddhism in general. And I don't want to dismiss that. But psychologically, developmentally, I think that may have some problems. There's a lot more in our experience than the emotion of happiness. And a lot of these things are important to look at. Now, in the case of kids, I mean, I kind of don't want to judge one way or another, because in a way, saying something like that may be good. That may be reflecting, like a kind of the beginning of a healthy boundary on their part, which is something along the lines of, well, the world has like all these problems, but I kind of have this space of my own where I can cultivate some happiness. I think that can potentially be a really good thing. But the problem is that when we start actually, practicing with awareness, there's a lot that's going to come up other than happiness. In other words, we don't get to really, in my opinion, we don't really get to just stay with the emotion of happiness as a mental factor. And if we do, the only way we can do that is to really kind of cut ourselves off from the world in a pretty unhealthy kind of a way. I mean, we have a lot of other things we need to experience, like grief, legitimate anger, the whole range of emotions. So, for example, Hongzhi, Zen Master Hongzhi back in China, said something to the effect of face everything, let go, and attain stability. I hear the face everything as facing everything in our experience. That's like the whole range of emotions that come up. Katagiri Roshi, who we'll get into, I think was somewhat famous for really facing everything that came up, not just happiness. And, another Hokyoji retreat that I got to attend the majority of the summer with the Jewel Mirror session, one of the teachers said something I liked, something to the effect of, when anxiety is present for you, just be with the anxiety. I think I like that. That kind of jibes with my understanding of what Zen practice is. Honestly, my reservation there is that that's not enough as a practice instruction, because my opinion is that in society we have such a massive bias against anything that we have categorized as negative emotions, that we simply don't want to look at those things. So if someone just gives you kind of like a one-time practice instruction, when anxiety is coming up, just be with the anxiety. My own experience, and I have a lot of experience with this, is that it's pretty easy to just ignore that and say, well, that can't possibly be right. Anyway, this is getting a little meandering. What I'm trying to get at here is some reasons why we might want to look more carefully at this question and ask, what do we actually mean by happiness and joy in a Buddhist setting? So that's what we're going to look at. If we have time, I'm going to compare text from these two books a little bit, from the Anapani Sutta. And then, so this is the funny story from the retreat, is I had a lot of these questions. Didn't feel like I did a pretty good job. Didn't feel like I did a very good job of expressing the questions. Kind of kept working on that afterwards. And eventually kind of gave up and said, okay, I'm going to go back to my primary job here of transcribing Katagiri Roshi's talks. So I picked up one that I had left off, and that's from 1979. And right away, Katagiri Roshi started talking about this topic, specifically the words in Sanskrit or Pali that mean joy and happiness in Buddhism. And he offered kind of a different perspective on what they mean. So I said, oh, okay, I guess I'm not done with this. This is kind of nice. So later on, I want to read a little bit of that talk. It's Where Karma Originates. It's the top thing on the website right now, because I just finished this one, more or less. Nothing is really finished. I keep going back through these transcripts constantly and making slight refinements to what he actually said. It's from 1980. Anyway, if I stop going on and on in the setup here, we'll have time to get to that too. But I'm a little bit concerned that we won't have time to get to everything I want to. So I kind of prepared a quick summary of kind of my results at the moment. I call this Joy and Happiness in Buddhism, a highly oversimplified summary. This is an extreme oversimplification, but I wanted to give you something here. So when we talk about joy and happiness in the Buddhist scriptures, the two words that are coming up frequently are in Sanskrit priti and in Pali piti. It's the same word. That is what is often translated as joy. Okay, not always. Sometimes when we say joy in Buddhism, we mean some completely different source word, but frequently. And similarly, the next thing actually that's often discussed is happiness, which is usually coming from the word sukha. The interesting thing about sukha is that it's the opposite of dukkha, more or less. Sukha and dukkha are kind of antonyms. Now, some of you may be aware that there's been a lot of discussion in Buddhism about the word dukkha in the last few years and what it means, because it was originally translated as suffering, which is, as Glenn Wallace says, not inaccurate, but a little bit drama queenish, if you forgive the expression. So dukkha includes a lot of things that are significantly less than suffering. And he ends up translating it as unease. And I would propose here that we may need to have a similar conversation about the word sukha, which Glenn Wallace translates as ease, as opposed to happiness. I think that for reasons I'll get into, ease is a better translation, although not without its problems. As far as joy, by the way, I was interested because I had so many kind of questions about Thich Nhat Hanh's translations of these things. I was a little surprised to find that he is sticking to the kind of standard accepted, I'm not going to say right, but the currently kind of accepted translations of these words, joy. But there's a little bit more to it, as we'll see, for priti and happiness for sukha. But Glenn Wallace uses delight for priti, which is maybe getting a little bit more into, well, I'll get into that in a second, and ease for sukha. So now I want to add, again, this is highly oversimplified, but I want to add what Katagiri Roshi kind of says about these words. And it's different. Katagiri Roshi explains piti or priti as joyful interest. Okay, joyful interest. That to me is quite a bit different than joy. Joy to me is an emotion. Joyful interest is more like an attitude or you could even say a practice. Like, for example, if I'm experiencing grief, let's just pick on grief for a moment, or anxiety is another good one. I can personally envision practicing joyful interest, or at least interest in the experience that's arising for me. I don't know if I can jump directly to joy, if you see what I mean. It's a little bit different. And the other one, sukha, Katagiri Roshi translates or explains as being much closer to samadhi, which is oneness. That's a word that comes up in Buddhism a lot. So if we believe that, I think Glenn Wallace's translation of ease is more in that direction. Happiness, I'll just throw this out there. Perhaps we can think of these terms at, ease and samadhi are things that more generally allow happiness to arise, if that makes sense. They kind of go in the direction of happiness more often than not, but they don't preclude a range of other experiences. Okay, are we okay so far? All right, gonna go on. Oh, we need to get moving along here. So we don't have a lot of time. So briefly, I did this whole set of slides comparing language from the two translations here. And I should mention there are many more translations. I'm using these two because these were kind of what we were focused on in the retreat, and they're good examples that bring up the questions that I think are interesting. When present moment awareness with breathing is persistently practiced and cultivated, it is rich in results of great benefit. This practice perfects present moment awareness in the 4 areas. When present moment awareness in the 4 areas is persistently practiced and cultivated, the 7 factors of awakening are perfected. When these 7 factors of awakening are persistently practiced and cultivated, this perfects higher knowledge and release. So one thing I would point out just very briefly in passing is the difference in translation. Thich Nhat Hanh says the 4 establishments of mindfulness. This is what is often referred to as the 4 foundations of mindfulness. This is very, very basic Buddhist stuff that you will hear coming up over and over again. And Wallace, instead of mindfulness, says present moment awareness. I think that's something to be aware of. The mindfulness, the word mindfulness, I think, is a relatively recent invention. And the interesting thing about using the word mindfulness is when we actually look at the four establishments of mindfulness, or the four areas of mindfulness, the first one is about the body. So I don't know what your understanding of mindfulness is. Mine tends to automatically veer in the direction of the mind. Uh, so it's just, if we just say awareness, it might make things a little bit less complicated. But that's a whole thing we don't have time to get into. There's a lot of discussion there. So this is just the setup for what the basic practice is. This is kind of nice. How is it practiced? Go to the woods, to the root of a tree, or to an empty hut. Sit down in cross-legged position and straighten your body, establishing present moment awareness right where you are. Breathe in, simply aware, then breathe out, simply aware. Okay. And then there's a whole set of 16, this is just part of the sutra, but there's a 16 practice points here. And in the Thich Nhat Hanh book, it's just a list of 16, and that's probably reflecting what's in the actual sutra, I believe. But one helpful thing in the Glenn Wallace book is it breaks it down into sets of 4, corresponding to the 4 areas of present moment awareness. The first one being the body. I don't claim to fully understand necessarily what this sutra is presenting as practice instructions, but I think it may be helpful to understand that this isn't just a long list, that there's actually more structure here. So this is breathing in long. I know directly I'm breathing in long, and so on. I'm going to skip lightly through this so that I can get to the main point. But this is the instructions for the body. 3 is I breathe in sensitive to the entire body. I breathe out sensitive to the entire body. This is one area where Thich Nhat Hanh and Wallace agree pretty well. Awareness being similar to sensitivity. Oops. All right, now we finally get to the part where I have some specific questions, which is the section about feeling, or that's coming from the word Vedana. Now, a side note that we also don't really have time to get into, the actual meaning of Vedana is, I would say, rather ambiguous. And actually, if you think about it, the meaning of the word feeling in English is also ambiguous. What does that mean? The big question that I have is, does that include actual emotions? Glenn Wallace says that it does. Many other commentators and translators say that it does not. My own feeling is that it kind of sounds like it doesn't. And Katagiri Roshi actually translates this as reception more than feeling, for whatever that's worth. So this is very interesting, but we don't have time to get into that, even if I had too much more to offer about it. So here's where we get to some interesting stuff. Well, it's all interesting, but here's where we get to the stuff about happiness and joyfulness. Thich Nhat Hanh has breathing in, I feel joyful. Breathing out, I feel joyful. Breathing in, I feel happy. Breathing out, I feel happy. While Wallace says, I breathe in sensitive to delight. I breathe out sensitive to delight. I breathe in sensitive to ease. I breathe out sensitive to ease. And these are coming from the Sanskrit or Pali words priti and sukha. Okay. The next, whoops, did I skip one? Oh, and then the next section is relating to mind. I breathe in sensitive to the mind. I breathe out sensitive to the mind. And here we have a little bit of a difference. This is my final sticking point here. Breathing in, I make my mind happy. Whereas Wallace says, I breathe in, gladdening the mind. So I did a few minutes of research on the internet where they have like a really cool kind of live translation between the Pali and English versions of this sutra. And what I found is that apparently gladdening here, or making the mind happy, this is coming from a different Pali word, pamadati, if I'm pronouncing that right, which could mean to rejoice, enjoy, to be delighted, to be glad or satisfied. Okay, so just keep in mind perhaps that although I'm not sure anyone translates it this way, maybe we could translate this more as I breathe in, delighting in the mind, rather than making the mind happy. Okay, I want to say, not that there's anything wrong with happiness. I would just repeat what I said earlier, that it's often perceived as an emotion, just one emotion out of a range of emotions. And why would I want to make my mind just that one thing? It's a little bit confusing. Okay, and then the final four are mental qualities and phenomena, or dharmas. This is mostly about impermanence and relinquishment. All right. So that brings me to Katagiri's talk here. I'm going to read the summary. This is the summary that I wrote. I try to write a summary after listening to these talks many times to try to capture what I thought were the most important points. So this summary is: Katagiri Roshi describes how karma is the basic nature of our lives. I might yet edit that. He says some more kind of lively stuff, like it's the source of our lives and that kind of thing. He reviews 12-chain causation, or the 12-linked chain of causation, sometimes referred to as the 12 links of dependent origination, noting that karma is samskara, link 2, and bhava, link 10. And these are produced by avidya, which is the first link, ignorance. But avidya is really vitality. This is how we get into the human world of the present moment. Now, in this talk, I'm going to skip entirely the part about the 12 links of dependent origination. If you have an interest, I strongly recommend this talk. He describes 4 stages of Zazen and 5 related consciousnesses. Vitarka, usually translated as thought. Vichara, discursive thinking. And here we go. Priti, joyful interest. Sukha, happiness. And samadhi, oneness. The description of priti and sukha in particular may be helpful in understanding what is meant when we see the words joy and happiness in English translations of Buddhist scriptures. Ultimately, the only way to understand karma is to do zazen. In the 4th stage of zazen, we are exactly one in the realm of source, which is karma. And then we can see what karma is. Okay. So let's see, I've got a few minutes left before I want to open it up to questions. So how much, or I could go a bit longer, so I'm wondering how much I want to go into this. I would ideally like to read this part, but maybe I'll skip down to where he's talking about the 4 stages. So according to Buddhism, there are 4 stages of Zen. And I added a note. These seem to correspond to the 4 jhanas, if you're familiar with those. In the first, so Katagiri Roshi is covering some what Glenn Wallace calls basic teachings of Buddhism. This is an interesting thing that I was not aware of in Katagiri Roshi's talk. These days, we do a lot of comparison and analysis between kind of like our branch of Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhism, and the Pali Canon, which is coming more from Theravadan Buddhism. And it surprised me a little bit that Katagiri Roshi was doing this back in 1979, 1980, and doing it very well, and in a very helpful way. And I think the things that he said back then can contribute a lot to our understanding of these issues today, which is why a big reason why I'm continuing to transcribe these talks. Anyway, in the first stage of Zen, all unwholesome dharma stops. Unwholesome dharma means unwholesome things, including physical and mental, whatever it is. If you get into Zazen meditation, in the first stage of Zazen, you can experience no unwholesome thing because you don't bring it up if you sit down like this. It's really true. Maybe you cannot do anything because your legs are fully cross-legged, crossing each other. Your hands are like this, so you cannot hit somebody. That's good. And also your mouth is closed. You cannot talk. And your eyes are cast on the floor, so you can't see anybody facing the wall. And also your thinking is coming and sitting in Zazen. Your thinking is coming and sitting in Zazen. So all things come back to Zazen, and there is nothing you can do. But still you think, I am a bad boy. That is imagination, so you can think. Imagination is imagination. If you don't meddle with anything, and the things in brackets here are parts where it may be difficult to hear what he's saying, so I'm not totally sure that I have this right. If you don't meddle with anything, imagination disappears. So just notice. You cannot put a label on that imagination. If you like, you can chase after it, but all you have to do is just exhaust, that's all. So in Zazen, if you return to you, all unwholesome things stop. This is very true. And then next, there are very important things still left. That is what is called Vitarka in Sanskrit, and also Vichara. Vitarka means thought. Thought consists in setting the human consciousness to an object. This is thought. In other words, we are always thinking something. I see this, subject object. So in other words, in Zazen, still you attach to the object. Well, I will talk about this later. And also Vichara means discursive thinking. So the two are pretty closely related. As I understand it, Vikara is the kind of basic thought, and Vichara is the additional kind of analysis we do around that. You can realize this, don't you think so? Your thinking is going on and on in Zazen. Yes, I personally, I don't know about you, but personally I do experience that. Well, if you sit down, there is completely nothing for you to do, but you can do many things. What do you do? Chasing all the thoughts and roaming around thinking. But thinking and thoughts are completely something you do in the dualistic world. And also the problem is that they are all imagination, just imagination. What do you think? All imagination. So in Zazen, you're really playing with imagination. I'm going to go a little bit long here before questions. There is the loud sound of a plane in the background. That's a note about what's actually on the recording that's significant. But finally, there is nothing to do because you realize how stupid you are. If you are chasing after the plane with thoughts, imagination, you realize how stupid you are. Finally, you think how stupid Zazen is. And the audience laughs at this point. It's not the fault of Zazen, it's your fault, don't you think so? Because you are chasing after thought, imagination. And then finally you criticize Zazen, how stupid Zazen is. I don't think so, you are stupid. And please understand, he's laughing as he says this. Don't you think so? I'm sorry for you. There's more laughter in the group. Well, if you return home exactly, you can experience this. This is what Buddhist scripture says. That is the first experience, the first stage of Zazen. First believe, well, it's not necessary to believe it. If you don't believe it, that's okay. And then here we have a change in the tape, so we lose a little bit of audio. And then we start getting into the part where I started realizing, wait a minute, he's talking about exactly what I was interested in here. But you start to poke your head into that joy because you don't know, but you feel something. So you start to poke your head into joy. That is priti in Sanskrit, joyful interest. And interestingly, looking back, this was a common translation, I think, earlier on. So I'm not sure how this became just joy at some point. Anyway, I digress. But joyful interest is still your six consciousnesses always working. That's why you start to poke your head into joyful interest. But that is not happiness. Next, still you can experience happiness. Happiness means samadhi, being one with zazen. That is what is called happiness in Buddhism. Okay. There was a very interesting, straightforward, direct statement. And because I have a lot of confidence in what Katagiri Roshi is saying, personally, I tend to regard these as kind of like landmarks, like, okay, here's a statement. This is something that I need to understand and work with. So, interestingly, he's not saying that, I don't think he's saying that happiness doesn't have any other meanings in common usage. I think he's saying that when we say happiness in Buddhism, this is what we're referring to, priti. And he seems to be suggesting that this is something identical to or very close to samadhi, which is pretty interesting. And it's not different from some explanations that I've heard, but the one difference for me is just how clearly and simply he's just coming out and saying it. At the first stage, you can experience five consciousnesses there. My note is elsewhere, these are described as five mental factors or cetasika. One is Vitarka, and Vichara, and also Priti, joyful interest, and happiness, Sukha, and also Samadhi. Those are the five consciousnesses. You can experience those five things psychologically. And also, basically, at the first stage of Zazen, all unwholesome things drop off. That's great. And then finally, nothing. He laughs. That is Zazen. So at the first stage of Zazen, you realize how stupid you are because you are always chasing after thoughts and because you completely exhaust from chasing. If you sit a 7-day sesshin, you really understand this. The first day, second day, you really struggle trying to make your mind calm. The third day, fourth day, well, you start to get tired, really tired. The fourth, fifth day, you start to give up chasing after thoughts because you start to realize how stupid I am, because you exhaust. Finally, the sixth, seventh day, you completely give up all thoughts. That's pretty nice. And finally, completely beyond trying or not trying, you can do Zazen. Just sit down. I want to go back just briefly to the thing about how stupid I am, because I find that sometimes people have a reaction to this. Understandably, we don't like being called stupid. And when he says this, I think it's in a humorous way. But also it's in a serious way. It's not saying that we obviously have a lot of intelligence. It's saying something about the fundamental way that we approach the world. If we start to think about it, we can laugh about it and say, okay, this is kind of dumb. I think that's what he's saying there. It's not a harsh kind of thing. I don't think it's an analysis and maybe a bit of strong language to kind of try to get the point across. At any rate, so there's more there, and I do need to hand it over to questions. I wish I'd gotten through a bit more of this. Maybe I'll read just a little bit more. Skipping to the third stage. In the third stage, gradually your interest in Zazen is snowballing. So you try to poke your head into joyful interest, what the truth is. In the realm of joyful interest, still your consciousness works. But finally, the six consciousnesses also drop off. Very naturally, all you have to do is just sit down. And then there is a smile, a little smile. And then you can be exactly one with Zazen. So no joyful interest, then just happiness there. Just happiness means exactly samadhi itself. Samadhi is oneness. So we're back to this very interesting analysis of what happiness means in Buddhism. And the way he's putting this out, I think helps may help understand why kind of the order of things. Again, I don't claim to really understand the Anapanasati Sutta. I haven't studied it nearly enough, and even if I had, I'm not sure I would totally get it. But it's kind of an interesting question that comes up is why is it first joy and then happiness? Does that make sense? And here, I think, is a pretty good explanation why that actually can make some sense in Buddhist terms. Joy, it's been put elsewhere online that joy is a little bit more energetic and happiness is a little bit more subtle, perhaps, is a simple way of putting it. But here he's actually saying something kind of beyond that, which is happiness in Buddhist terms is, well, samadhi, oneness, which might entail some letting go, some relinquishment. I guess that's as much time as I have to say something about that. And then at the fourth, that was my best shot, sorry. And then at the fourth stage of Zazen, completely there is no happiness because there is no space to touch the happiness. If you touch the happiness, it means you see the happiness there and you are here. And then this person looks at the happiness. At that time, this happiness is not real happiness. That is an image of happiness. That's why you touch it just like this. And then you enjoy it very much. But at that time, while you are touching this happiness, that means that your six consciousnesses are still poking your head into this. That's not happiness, technically. That is joyful interest. Okay. And then if we want to follow, maybe we should just follow this all the way kind of to the conclusion here of this part of his talk. So if you see the happiness, I mean, in for a penny, in for a pound here. So if you see the happiness at the third stage of Zazen, completely at the fourth stage of Zazen, there is no trace of happiness, just one. At that time, you don't know. This is what is called enlightenment. But most people think enlightenment is still sort of the dregs, the trace left behind your experience. That means always touching the top of enlightenment, but that is just the image of enlightenment. Real enlightenment is no trace. That is Zazen. And then when you really return home like this, exactly you are one in the realm of the source, which is called karma. And then you can see karma, what karma is, really, you can touch it. And this karma is really the basic nature of your life. This is not only a particular person. All human beings are just like this. So just a concluding comment of mine here, which I find it fascinating that this discussion is coming up within the topic of karma that Katagiri Roshi is discussing. I find it fascinating that he's talking about Zazen as a way of looking at karma, and just a little something maybe to think about when we talk about happiness. When we're looking at karma, I think it's probably safe to say that when we're experiencing karma, not all of the things there are exactly what we would think of as happy. There's a reason, perhaps, why they call it ancient twisted karma. There's a lot going on there. There's good things, what we would call good things, there's what we would call bad things. Ultimately, it's just karma. But it includes a lot of pretty intense stuff. There's racism, there's hatred, there's, all kinds of things within karma. Okay, how far did I actually made it. This is kind of my last slide. So I am a bit over time, but I am going to open it up to any questions or discussion. And Alex, you can let me know if we need to cut this off. We'll see if anybody has anything to say here. So
Yeah, no, I think we're good to go. Yeah, open up the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Questions or comments? Aaron.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for that. Was really interesting. I'm so a- appreciative of the various. I'm just trying to get my ducks in a row here. Things that you mentioned, but also your approach. And I'm kind of personally interested in grammatical oriented things. And so looking at the words and explaining. And I find that when I do that, I'm always a little concerned because there's so many languages and the practice has gone through so many languages and so much can happen when that happens. And so I do try to look at the origins of the words, but then just an interesting thing that I've noticed as I try to do that with not a lot of linguistic training, but is that I come back to the English word, and then I'm still, well, what does the English word mean? And then I go off in another direction, and then I wonder, well, why did they pick what historical reason brought them to pick that particular word? And some people pick other words, but it does seem, happiness comes up a lot, and um, I just wonder, why that word was chosen and used so often. What do we mean when we try to assign that particular English language word to this concept? And no particular observation, but it's something that I keep coming up against. Anyway, thank
Oh,
you.
totally. Yes, thank you for that. Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree, Aaron. And one thing about this kind of study and research is, I have to admit, it does often seem to be just a bottomless rabbit hole. Through the looking glass. And if we go back to the summary of Katagiri Roshi's talk. It's fascinating to me because I think my impression is that Katagiri Roshi himself is very interested in some of these distinctions. At least he seems to understand them quite well, and he must have done, I would assume, quite a bit of work to arrive at that understanding. Another way of putting that is, Katagiri Roshi has had an undeniable kind of, can we say spiritual? I don't know, Zen presence, which I think people responded to. I think it's less well known that he had a brilliant analytical mind, and that his talks are, well, brilliant. They're excellent talks and they're very coherent. And he knew what he was trying to say. It's just that since he was not a native English speaker, some of the words would come out a little bit out of order or garbled sometimes. And I think I'm getting off track a little bit from your actual point. But yes, for myself, I'm trying to find a balance between meditation and study, because in plain terms, it would be very easy to go completely in the direction of study and analysis. And as Katagiri Roshi says very clearly, ultimately, that's not what it's about. I think, to put it as simply as I can, I think that some intellectual understanding can be very helpful. And perhaps more to the point, I think that an incorrect understanding can be actively unhelpful. And that's kind of where we get into the kind of difficulty here. What you're talking about, the reasons why certain words were translated as they were. Well, we need to look at the possibility that a lot of times the actual reasons are that the people who were doing the translating were coming from a Christian background, just amongst many other factors. And, look at the word enlightenment, for example, or suffering, or even the word sin comes up in certain contexts. And they may not have even realized it when these early translations were being done, but I think their background did influence the kind of words that they were choosing. And we're still, still trying to untangle that. Many people, I think, decades later. So I'm a bit hopeful, actually, that we're making some progress. It's nice for me to see a book like Glenn Wallace's Basic Teachings of the Buddha, where he's offering some very interesting, I think, and helpful alternative translations. That's one of the primary things he does. Even though I would hasten to add, I just reread Wallace's book, and there are aspects of it that I don't necessarily agree with. So it's not like I'm totally jumping on the Glenn Wallace bandwagon as far as interpretation of Buddhism. However, I think it's very useful to have this conversation up to a point. And then when we get to Sesshin, we can hopefully drop that and just focus on actually following the instructions as best we understand them, maybe. That's kind of my take on things. I don't know if that actually addressed your comment, but that was kind of long. Any other questions and comments?
Hello, Kikan. This is Bo.
Hey, Bo.
So this is the first I've heard of samadhi being kind of translated to happiness or being happiness. I'm curious if, in your experience, if that's a common understanding of samadhi, or even how other people interpret samadhi. Because just in my experience, which I think is fairly limited, is just kind of like rapture or peace. But this is my first where it's been kind of like determined as happiness.
Yeah. Great question. Thank you. Is samadhi happiness? Is this a common interpretation? I think that's kind of what I'm overall trying to address. I'm just going to say, in kind of crude terms, my understanding is that there may be two or more kind of different kinds of happiness. There's kind of emotional happiness, and then there's something that I personally would prefer to translate more as freedom or liberation, or what are some other good words? There are some other good words, or, in my humble opinion, like better words. I think that sometimes in Buddhism, to put it very simply, when we talk about happiness, what we're actually talking about is freedom or liberation, a kind of, it even ties into a kind of relinquishment. There's just a kind of, or okay, so one of the better words is ease. That's the one that Glenn Wallace uses. So is that a common understanding? Yeah, I think that's kind of the point, is that I'm not sure that it is. So I'm putting it out there. Do we understand it this way? Is this a good way of understanding what we mean by particularly the word sukha in Buddhism? Is that what we would think of happiness? And honestly, I still have no idea. This is an ongoing question for me. What I kind of wanted to do in this talk is to provide some information. And I figured, okay, if I go through a little bit of the Anapanasati Sutta and talk about the definitions of priti and sukha, where those are coming from, and particularly if I can read a little bit of Katagiri Roshi's talk where he's talking about this, I'll call that a win. but my real question here ultimately would be how are emotions regarded in Buddhism, how we work with those, how we understand those. And I do not know the answer to that question. So I probably don't know the answer to your question either. If that helps.
It does. Thank you.
Thanks. Anybody else? Any final questions, insights, comments? Hi, Kim.
Yes. First of all, I'd like to say thank you very much for translating Katagiri's talks. Having sat through them, you often sat through something and had no concept whatsoever about what had been spoken. Sometimes it would arise later on, but the combination of language and intricacy of the topics, I think, were, to say the least, very challenging.
Yeah.
Yes. Secondly, the one of the things that I'm seeing here, I like the point that we can't count on the words to bring us to the promised land. And I think that one of the things that occurs to me in listening to Katagiri's translations, I mean, he was a scholar. I've come to understand that. But he also had, as you were mentioning, calling it spirituality, but I think just a great depth of understanding, and not just understanding of scholarly topics, but understanding of whatever reality is. And I'm picking a word that's not very descriptive. And I think when you know what the answer is and you look at somebody's words, it might be easier to make a translation. So when he looks at these things, he's got both a scholarly background and a very sound understanding of Dharma. And so that's something that I thought was important. And there's a couple of things, and I might be missing the boat on. There's two selections of words that I particularly liked, and I think one was Katagiri's use of receptiveness, or to be receptive, and the other one is ease from Glenn Wallace, and he used also unease for suffering, and then the use of ease for samadhi or happiness, whatever it might be. And both of these are passive. Happiness is something that you can see outside, and I kind of want to get that stuff. Give me some of that happiness. But by saying receptive, that's got a different flavor to it. What's my role in being receptive? I'm not reaching out, I'm opening up. And that seems to be more descriptive to me of sitting zazen. And likewise, ease instead of happiness. Ease is being relaxed. It's being, to me, receptive, and it's not reaching out for something. It's just being open to something coming in. And that general concept of being open to something that's out there and that's willing to come in, and you don't have to go run after it someplace, either through words or through greed, through want, through desire. It will arrive. I think I very much like those. So thank you very much for your talk. Appreciate greatly. Likewise for your translations.
Thank you, Kim. Yeah, I think those are all excellent points. Personally, I feel like those are all great points that you raise. I do want to just say what I'm doing technically is transcribing, not translating. Minor difference, although sometimes it feels pretty close. I do totally, because I have to go through carefully each talk, probably a minimum of 5 times before I can even begin to actually understand what he's actually saying. I have a lot of sympathy for the people who got this exactly once. I mean, a lot of people, they probably picked up quite a bit because they were there for many of his talks, and he repeats the same things. But nevertheless, yeah, to just to only hear a single talk just once, yeah, it's almost inevitable that you're going to miss, like the majority of what I think he's putting into that talk. So yeah, that's been my experience. Not just because it's a little difficult to understand what he's saying, but also because what he's saying is really pretty intricate. He packs like a lot into those talks. I recommend, like, this was one that was particularly a lot of work for me to transcribe this talk on karma. It's the first or second of a series on karma called, which one is this? Where Does Karma Originate? Which is, I don't know if I'd agree with that title. It's really, the talk is almost more about where we originate than where karma originates. But anyway, this is a really in-depth talk, and it includes talking about the 12 links of dependent origination or arising, which is a very difficult topic in Buddhism. And he's just basically doing that as the warm-up. So it's a fascinating talk, and I really fully recommend it to anybody who's interested in delving kind of deeply into these things. Anyway, thank you very much, Kim. So I'm guessing it's 10:30. I'm guessing, Alex, that's probably where we want to cut things off.
Yeah, that sounds good. Kikan, thank you so much. That was excellent. I really appreciated that talk. I appreciate karma as being the realm of source. I haven't quite heard it like that, more like cause and effect. So, and also he says if you try to understand it, that you'll go, was it crazy and confused, which sounds a lot like my 20s. So I'm glad I'm sitting zazen. So thank you, everyone. Just a couple of quick announcements. So coming up, the end of this month, we have our land care weekend on the 21st, and then on the 27th, we have our men's retreat, followed in November by 5-day just sitting retreat, the healing retreat, which will come up the week after that, and then on 11/18, we have our work weekend, and all of that's heading into Rohatsu, yay! So be sure to like us and comment and share on Facebook and Instagram if you like. Tell your friends, come stay here. We've got Midwestern charm. We've got Southern charm. We've got all kinds of charm. It's beautiful here. And as always, your generosity sustains us. We couldn't do this without you. Please consider making a donation with the link that is in the chat. Any gift, any amount, we are deeply grateful for. I am deeply grateful for the opportunity to practice. This place is super special, and it is a very vital and essential community in American Buddhism. So thank you all. Y'all have a great week, and we'll see y'all soon.
Thanks, everybody. Yeah, nice to see you.
Yeah, we'll do the four vows and we'll close.
Yeah. Okay.
Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, everybody.